I'm so thrilled to have both of you here to be able to talk about this album that I'm so excited to get back out into the world. And Rupert, I was telling Lenny yesterday, I've been listening over and over again, in the past 6 months as we prepared this reissue. And it really, I think this album is going to blow a lot of minds. Both of your work on this album is just so fantastic and so out there. And the story is just so incredible that I can't wait to share it. And I'm so thrilled, first and foremost, to be able to share it with both of you who made it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate all that smoke up my ass. So thank you very much. Frankly, I hadn't listened to the record for the last 30 or 40 years until you sent it last night. So it
Wow.
kind of blew my mind a little bit because I think I don't know. I won't speak for Rupert, but it had been at times a source of embarrassment because of the nature of the recording that it was, half.
Let's put it in context right away. Not the nature of the recording, the
Yeah,
nature of the frame of the
yeah.
recording, what was
That,
associated with the recording. Not. I just want to. I feel no shame about what's on the vinyl and now in the streaming.
yeah. That's exactly what I meant to say. Thank you for
Sure.
clarifying.
Yeah. I didn't mean to cut
Yeah,
you off. I'm
exactly. And
so
I think
sorry.
that's
I'm good.
now, once people hear this record and then they learn the entire story, I think that's it. And you hit the nail on the head there, that this really is a great record. And I wouldn't be reissuing it if I didn't believe in this record. And I do believe in this record. So I'm just so excited to get it out there again. And I guess I would like to just start by asking you, gentlemen. I believe that you were both brought into this project through Michael Wright. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, I'll speak first if that's okay. Michael
Yeah.
was the producer of the album, and he oversaw the recording, as far as I remember. And Rupert, of course, if your memory is different than mine, please feel free to correct me. But the band had been going through several permutations at that point, and we were asked by Barry Kerr. I believe he was the catalyst at either finding Michael, and I know that Michael had had a connection with Rupert, with the boys, with the song Timothy. You probably know that already. Um, so there are a lot of tangents and a lot of different connections that came through. I don't exactly remember how Michael became involved in this. Perhaps Rupert knows better, but we became fast friends, and I spent a lot of time in Michael's apartment with his wife Diane, and and subsequent years and projects before he passed away. But I don't exactly know how he became involved initially.
Um, I can tell you about my involvement with Michael, and I can make an educated guess about how he became involved. Um, Usually, first of all, let me talk about Michael, who was billed on some records as C. Michael Wright.
Right.
We knew him as Michael Wright, but his more official billing was C. Michael Wright. And I met Michael when he was an assistant engineer at Scepter Records' own in-house recording studio. That was located at 254 West 54th on the fourth floor.
Hmm.
And wonderfully for me, years later, when my Tony Award-winning musical, The Mystery of Edwin Drood, was revived on Broadway in 2012, 2013, it was at the theater at 254 West 54th Street, which had in earlier years been the famous Studio 54. And when we were there and working with Michael there, although that's not where I recall, I think we recorded the album at Groove Sound, is my
Yes, on
remember
55th
Correct.
Street.
on 53rd, I think it's 55th,
55th, right.
55th Street,
Right
right.
next to the David Cinema, which
The
is no longer
David
there.
Cinema, the David Cinema. Yes, one of the first. David Cinema had, let's digress. They had an interesting policy. I believe it was one of the first, certainly the first Midtown gay porn theaters, if I recall. Yes, movie theaters. And I think for a period of time, they had an interesting thing where they showed two movies side by side on the screen, one heterosexual and one homosexual. And the idea, I think, was that if you were caught walking into the David Cinema, you weren't necessarily blowing your cover. You might be looking at the left screen
Wow.
and not the right screen.
Wow.
Does that sound? Yeah.
How
Yeah,
do you
was,
know that?
I know that because I did the music for other porno films. This is not the only porno film that I ever did the score for. I did the score in my early years for the sequel to Deep Throat and Devil and Miss Jones. It was called Memories Within Miss Aggie. It was quite well received as the Ingmar Bergman of the porn industry.
Wow.
And I did one called Wet Rainbow, where I not only sang my own songs and took my credit with my own name, but dubbed in the voice of Georgina Spelvin, the porn actress, in a number of these scenes where they had forgotten to record her dialogue.
Wow.
And interestingly, we can get it. Interestingly, that particular porn film, and perhaps The Flasher, which was the basis of our work together, and Memories Within Miss Aggie, actually led to my meeting and working with Barbara Streisand, and I'll try to explain that to you later in the
recording. Yeah.
But anyway, I met Michael as an assistant engineer, and he and I had about 6 months experience. I'd been in the record business maybe about 9 months, and it would be another 2 years before the record business was even aware of this. I just happened to think I was in the business. And Michael had a number of things. He had a vision. He had wonderful musical taste. He had passion for the artists he worked with. He never worked with a band that he didn't care about, you being a very key case of that.
Yes, I remember. I remember distinctly. And I digress a bit because after the album was recorded, the following summer of '73, he went on tour with the band as our audio engineer. He treated me like family, and I'll never forget his kindness. But please continue.
No, he was wonderful. So he possessed vision, musical sensibilities, a passion for the artists he worked with, and something else. He possessed the keys to Scepter Records studio, so that on weekends when there was no one there, we could sneak in and over the weekend make a billion never to be released recordings with any band that he would discover and care about. One of them for me was a band called the POOH-PAH out of Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. And with them, we recorded a song I wrote expressly for them called Timothy, right, which turned out to be my first top 20 Billboard song. I didn't sing on the record. Some people think I did, but I didn't. But it was my first top 20 record, and it was a complete calculated choice on my part to try to get some attention for the band that he had signed to Scepter Records. And Joe, do we have room for me to just tell this story quickly?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. We'll get back to this. What is the album being released as? Is it being released as The Flasher?
Correct.
Joe?
The Flasher by POOH-PAH.
Good. Which went by the film that it was for which it was the score went by another name that we don't have to get into right now. Anyway, Michael, this wonderful Michael, he and I would make records together on the weekends with any musicians we could find. We got our string section. We found kids from the High School of Performing Arts and gave them $10 a piece to play violin tracks. And we learned an awful lot about making records on those weekends. And he was able to sign this group of his, the Boys, out of Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, to a 2-single deal on Scepter Records, which they gave Michael mainly as a kindness, as a courtesy. And after the first single came out and did nothing, he came to me and said, I've got this band. We have the chance to make one more record, one more 45. And I don't think the label even knows they're on the label. What do I do? I said, well, you should record a song that gets banned. And he said, what? That sounds like a very bad idea. Why would I do that? I said, because if it's banned, there will be controversy. There will be publicity. You can go to another record label and say, this is the group. They would have had a hit if it hadn't been banned. They've got problems. You can do that. And he said, well, will you write me a song that will get banned? And in those days, my policy was to say yes to absolutely every opportunity presented to me. And money had nothing to do with it. If it cost me money, I'd say yes. And so I wrote the marching band arrangement of Frosty the Snowman, and the arrangement marching band for Oye Como Va by Santana, and did the lead sheets at Scepter Records for the Five Blind Boys of Alabama. So any job. So I said, yeah, I'll write you a song that gets banned. And I it's a longer story than this, but I'm going to wrap it up here with this sentence, Joe. But I wrote this song about cannibalism during a mining disaster, which is left as a kind of mystery as to what happened to the victim, whose name is Timothy. And it charted. And suddenly Michael and I were feeling some oats here as people making records. We made another single called Give Up Your Guns with the boys, big orchestration, good record. He found some other groups. And around that time, I believe, if I've got my time frame right, he was all excited about your band and an opportunity that he found for the band. And this was what Michael was about. I've got opportunities. I can't offer a lot of money. I can't even necessarily offer you a record deal. I think that Barry Kerr, who was a pharmacist,
Yes,
who had an interest, Barry Kerr was a pharmacist who I think had an interest in being a film producer.
right.
Whether his key interest was producing porn films, I don't know, or whether it was just a situation that evolved. For your viewers, Joe, they should understand that this was a period in the history of porn in America where porn was getting some legitimacy. It was beginning to be thought that films, serious films, might come out of this industry, low budget, because it was the youth movement in Hollywood anyway. And so there was nothing younger than porn films. You were burned out usually in them by your mid-20s. So none of us were really that apologetic of if we had the chance to take advantage of a situation. And in this case, the point that I would make for your viewers about Lennie and myself is we scored a porn film. We did not score in a porn film. We were not actually on screen in the movie. So whether you write the music for a Hitchcock film or a film called Forbidden Under the Censorship of the King, it was still your music. And we had a chance to get out a cast album, thinking of Broadway now. We had a chance to get a soundtrack album out. You were guaranteed an album without having to go through the agony of selling yourselves to a label as being worthy. And I think that's how it all came together. And
yeah, I have the same recollection in that I didn't really care about the film, although there are some stories where I was in Barry Kerr's apartment while he was auditioning actors and actresses, I use the term loosely, for the project. It kind of blew my mind. I was 19 years old. Let's put it in perspective. And I looked upon it, just as Rupert described it, as an opportunity to get my stuff on a record. I really didn't care about the connection, although we all played along because it was an opportunity.
Right. And, one of the things that I was fascinated to find out, and dovetails exactly with what you're both saying, was that at the second annual Erotic Film Festival, this film won Best Soundtrack.
I'm still waiting. I'm waiting for my award.
At the time.
There's a space right there by my Tony Awards, and it's reserved for that. The mails are so slow these days.
Yeah.
It's just such a shame. It's one of those things where it was wonderful to read about it, but no one ever contacted you, or anything like that. No. And same thing, by the way, with some of the chart positions that my records achieved. I don't remember getting many royalty statements from Scepter Records for Timothy. I just read that it was 17 in Billboard, but right. The money was always soon to come. The mails are slow.
Yeah.
But it was exciting. And Michael, I sort of, you talk about being 19, Lennie, and I was almost an elder statesman because I think I was maybe 22 at the time.
Yeah.
And I had actually, I believe, and I may be wrong about this, I think I had actually done a legitimate film score for a terrible movie, but at least it was a legit film at that time. I did the music for a Western that came out under several different titles. its original title was The Animals. They couldn't be killed; they had to be destroyed. And then it was it was the first movie. Talk about X ratings. This was the first movie under the new rating system to get an X rating for violence. And it was, I always refer to it as an Italian Western made in America. It looked, the looping was so bad that it looked like it had been dubbed. But the actors, the lead actor was Keenan Wynn, a great actor, great actor. Sure. Keenan Wynn as a terrible criminal. Henry De Silva as playing an indigenous American, as of course he was meant to, since he was I think he was born in Puerto Rico, and an actress who was in an Elvis movie, Michelle Carey, and she was also in Dirty Dingus McGee with Frank Sinatra.
Frank Sinatra, yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
I guess we could call it a SpaghettiOs Western.
I like that. I should have thought of that in my next interview. I will have thought of that. So I had the experience of making a movie for next to nothing, and the soundtrack was pretty good, and I got to sing a little in the movie. So I think I came to this as the distinguished filmmaker that I was already.
Elder statesman.
I came in to be both supplying underscore for certain sequences, and also to kind of work as a kind of arranger. And in a couple of instances, I think I was a sideman. I hear myself on organ on at least one cut.
Yes, and I wanted to bring that up and ask you, good that you did. I was trying to, with the help of Bruce Handelman, who says hello, by the way,
right.
He had a much clearer memory of who played what on what tracks. So on the track that became the theme song and really made the album a collector's item was Sour Soul, which when you brought it to the studio, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said, I stole these chord changes from the soundtrack of Mysterious Island, the Ray Harryhausen film. And that has stuck in my mind for 50 years now. But I did not know if it was you, and I believe it is you on the recording playing the organ, which is just not complicated, but the chord changes, in other words.
Well, where I play organ, I believe, please forgive me. You give me the title. By the way, your voice is so damn great. All the cuts.
Thank you.
I was sitting here seeing this. You were a really, I don't mean this in any way to be a negative. You were I felt like I was working with really wholesome guys on a slightly tawdry project, but you guys were smart. You were all smart. I felt like you were all Ivy League bound. And or perhaps Ivy League already, and gracious. You were very well-mannered people, and your voice sounds just wonderful. But tell me, what's the one? Oh, da 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 da. Do they see my love? Can you see my?
Yeah, that's called. I believe that's Winter in April's Eyes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or maybe it's April, which I can't remember. It's something with April in the title. But I listened to it last night, and there are two clarinets. You're playing one of them, and I believe Seth Handelman, who also doubled on alto sax and guitar, is playing the other clarinet. It kind of blew me away because it's a simple thing.
I play a lot of instruments very badly. I'm very proud of that. But I was a good clarinetist. I went to Manhattan School of Music, where I just got an honorary doctorate. I wish I could turn the camera and show it to you.
Congratulations.
I got an honorary doctorate from a school that I had to drop out of because my career was getting too busy to learn how to write music. I was getting too busy getting my songs recorded to learn how to write, and they just rewarded me with that. But I was a clarinet major initially at Manhattan School of Music, and I heard what I thought were double-tracked clarinets in unison, and I thought when I heard it, I double-tracked that because that was a standard thing I would do. Anytime I had a line, I would just double it because the square waves would make it sound. But now that you mention it, it is absolutely possible that that's Seth and myself both on clarinet, which is really quite cool.
Yeah, Bruce.
You don't usually have two clarinets in a band.
No. Or two bagpipes. Bruce insisted that it was you and him and Seth. So
I'm sorry.
I'm going to ask Seth as well after we get off this call, of course. if
Sure.
he has the same recollection or not.
Give
But
me
it was
the
a
horn.
really nice background to the melody, as I recall. It really made the song, or made it sound that way. Because I was just geeking out on Backrack lately, thinking about how his arrangements supported the melody, and it's the same thing.
Yeah. First of all, do me a favor. Give me the horn lineup again. I thought it was, I remember a trumpet and an alto. Was there a third horn player?
No, Bruce and
Just the
Seth
trumpet.
both doubled. Bruce
Okay.
doubled on trumpet, and Seth on sax. So that was
Right,
it.
right. So Seth was the sax player who would have played clarinet with me. Right.
Yes.
What I remember doing on that cut was picking a very not it's Aaron Copland had this, he had a way of writing that believed that certain kinds of sounds are so clean that they're not dissonances because they're attractive. And I was very influenced by Copland at that time. I was in love with everything he wrote.
Yeah.
And I think that I picked an odd note to be the counter note against your vocal on the choruses.
I believe it's the major seventh.
Yeah, it's just, but it's on a major chord. It's like,
yes,
so it feels like it might be dissonant, and then it resolves very nicely and sweetly. And I thought, boy, that sounds like what I would have thought was yummy musically back then. So,
and it was
that.
It was very tasty.
Sour Soul. I'm playing. You have to understand, Joe, how analog the world was at this time.
Right.
You know, we thought we were living it high. This was recorded in an 8-track studio. That was pretty impressive, 8 tracks. And what you're hearing on Sour Soul is synthesizer, but synthesizer at a time when we were all terrified of it and had no idea how to operate it. It looked like a switchboard in the lobby of the Ritz Hotel. It's just all patch chords. Do you remember, or is it on the album, who the synth programmer was?
It was Jeff Mitchell, who was in Ralph. He had one of the first ARP 2600s.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. If you Google ARP 2600, it looks like something you'd find in a computer bad sci-fi movie from the 70s.
Right.
It had different sections for different sine waves and stuff, and you had to know what you were doing to program it to make one sound. And that was Jeff was very good at that. Many times, and I'm digressing again, forgive me, when we were in the band Ralph, which is another story, he was always programming the damn thing between songs, because it was only one note at a time.
One note at a time.
Yeah, you could. Later it became polyphonic, but it was an amazing thing. And if you got one, it's worth about 20 grand now. So, but yeah, I don't know that you played it, Rupert, or did Jeff play it and record it?
I'm not trying to take false credit. And if Jeff disputes this, I would gladly yield.
Jeff no longer is alive, unfortunately. He's gone too.
Terrible news to hear.
Yeah, sorry.
Again,
sorry to be the bearer of bad news.
Yeah, that's terrible. Yes, I can remember wanting to play the part and knowing what the part was, and to have written it out for him would have taken too much time in the studio. So what I remember is being grateful that he knew more about programming it than I did. The other thing, Joe, is if you got a sound you liked on it, you had to write up every setting on every knob and every patch chord if you ever wanted to get that setting again. There was no save. There was no way you could lock a sound in and say, oh, I'll go back to, you couldn't. And if you wanted to switch sounds in the middle of a song, forget it. You'd need a 32-bar rest to do all that. And I was working with monophonic synthesizers. We call them that because they played one note at a time. You could not play a chord on a synthesizer, not until the Prophet 5 came out. That was the big breakthrough. And that wasn't until much later on. When I did the Streisand album, when I did an album with Barbra Streisand called Lazy Afternoon, and there's a cut on it called You and I, which is the Stevie Wonder song. And I knew that I could get Barbara to like it more if I added synthesizer chords all throughout the second half of the song. But I had to write a 4-part chorale for the synth part because I was going to play the synth and I had to know what all the other parts were before I played the first line. And so I basically had to do 4 tracks of synthesizer to get it sounding as if you could play chords on a synth, but you couldn't. Same thing with the Pina Colada song, by the way. That's one of the last appearances of a monophonic synthesizer is a Korg, the Korg version of a mini Moog, and all the sound of the flutes in the instrumental break and the sweep of the ocean. That's all done on a little monophonic synthesizer. But what I do remember is that I knew exactly the part that I wanted to play because it was a kind of riff that for me embodied what movies sounded like, James Bond movies, Billion Dollar Brain, those kind of films. And I used the riff. I always was using the riff. Da 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 da. I always felt that half step, da da da, felt like a movie, and I used it on that cut. And I then later used it as the lead riff on a song of mine called Widescreen, which was on my first solo album. But yeah, I mean, the thing you have to understand is we were like kids, let alone with, you know, it was like we were let alone in the toy store for the whole weekend. We just, it was, how can we do this? We have no money. How can we come up with a track? I feel like on Sour Soul, which is a song I've come to know because it pops up on YouTube a lot. People steal it. They use it as a track for their own rap records, and they seem to feel it embodies that it is a quintessential 70s sort of shaft black exploitation track that embodies all the best of what those kind of records were, the Isley Brothers kind of thing, you know, of the 70s. And I think that I recommended that we rent, I certainly didn't own it myself, a pedal that gave you the effect of a wah-wah pedal, but it was based only on the input of the guitar. And who was your guitarist at that time?
Well, that's what I'm glad you asked, because that leads me into his name was Billy Arrington.
And I remember that. Yes.
Yeah, and he played the guitar, did a great job on it. The history of the band is that after the record sort of got shelved before it became resurrected, Billy and I left the band. Billy went to high school with Bruce and Seth Handelman, and his whereabouts are unknown at this point. I've been trying to find him, but you know, he was the black guy in the white guy band, which was not easy for him, but a very talented singer and player. I love his playing on it. I mean, I hear it when I listened to the record last night. I could definitely pick out what he did. But yeah, he makes that track move. He does.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
really good.
It's he's playing great guitar in that. It's a lot of very delicate guitar work too. People think that this is entirely a noise rock out. It's not that at all.
No.
There's a lot of cuts that if they had cropped up on Abbey Road, no one would have been particularly surprised.
Yeah.
And a lot of aesthetic things. Can you tell me a little bit about, there was one cut there, and I remember singing background with you guys. And it was called Kamara.
Yes.
And I remember at one point we go into kind of a trance-like thing where we're just going Kamura. And it was funny because we were all singing these chords. And as I was singing them, I thought, and this is a really odd thing for a musician who's had, a music conservatory education and could orchestrate for most instrumentations. I remember saying, I'm singing background, and I can't tell if the chord I'm singing is a major or a minor chord.
Yeah, it kind of had that.
I couldn't say, am I singing a minor third or a major third?
I think it was actually a second or ninth.
Say again.
I think it's a 2-note instead of a 3 or minor 3. And I have to go back and listen to it, but I'm glad you brought that up, because that is the only song that the band was asked to compose specific to a scene in the movie. It was about somebody who could only achieve orgasm with the use of a camera. So yeah, and like you said, we were choir boys, and my Catholic upbringing made that a little difficult, but I overcame it somehow. The song was supposed to, especially at the end, to coincide with an orgasm on screen. There. Yeah, you dragged it out of me.
And here's the thing: we were in an era where you didn't necessarily cut away.
No,
It wasn't a symbolic Hollywood moment where the camera pans to the window and we see the sweep of the ocean. No, it just stayed right there.
Yeah, not like that at all. Well, look, if we had no money, Barry Kerr had next to no money to make the film.
So you've answered another question. I was going to ask you. I sang Kamura.
Yes, yes, you did.
And it was spelled K-A-H
M-U-R-A.
R-A.
Yeah, to sound like the word word camera, but not actually be a camera. That was it.
I'm wondering why I never. One of the questions I was looking forward to asking you, which you now have answered for me, was what the hell did that word mean? Why were we singing that word? And I didn't realize that that was your kind of Inagata-Devita version of the word camera.
Yes, exactly.
Joe, you know about all things, Joe. Can I ask you a question? Is it an urban legend?
Yeah, of course.
Is it true or not that Inagata-Devita is really that the lead singer was singing in the Garden of Eden and his diction was so bad that it came out Inagata-Devita?
That's what I've heard many times. Yes.
Mm-hmm. I think it's true. Absolutely. I think it's true.
Yeah.
Even if it isn't, it's a great story. I love the idea.
Exactly.
It's like people think that my song is if you like bean enchiladas and getting caught in the rain.
Misheard lyrics. Yes.
So now I know what Kamara means. Sour Soul. I think I was very, very impressionable. The movie You Only Live Twice, the fifth James Bond film, and John Barry's score, that had really made a big impact on me. And I think I was hoping that our horn sound could give us some sense of something like a Bond film. And I got to tell you, Seth and I'm blanked again. Bruce, right? I'm sorry. I know someone with a name almost like Bruce Handelman, and it's throwing me. We double tracked them, definitely, and I wrote these parts, but they sound really solid on Sour Soul. That's a good horn section.
Yeah, it's a good record. I was stunned to find that I played bass on that track. I don't remember playing bass on any of these tracks.
You played.
It was very simple, not very challenging, but it worked. You know.
You played great bass on Sour Soul. That's a good bass line.
Well,
I always wondered who did it. Now I know. It's you.
You did. Oh, I mean, you wrote it for me. I remember you showing it to me. It's like real simple, and it was easy for my brain to remember. So thank you. But I was stunned to learn that what Bruce told me, he said, whenever there's a horn on any of these tracks, you were playing bass. And when there wasn't, you were playing guitar. So that made it easy for me to remember.
Yeah. It's all about the bass, seriously, and I'm not even making it. No, I didn't. I actually said that without meaning to be quoting. There you go. That's the clef. That's the clef. That's you're the keynote speaker. To me, what the bass is playing against everybody else is what a record is all about.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that it's immortalized somewhere.
Yeah. And then there were a couple of cuts. Go ahead, Joe.
No, you finish, Rupert.
Oh, God, I never finish. You know that by now. No, what's your question, buddy?
About so Kamarad, we know obviously was composed for that scene in the film, and we know your underscore was composed to the film. The other vocal tracks on the album, were they songs part of POOH-PAH's repertoire previously, or did you write them specifically for the film too, Lenny?
No, the only song that the band composed was Camera. The other songs, the two ballads that I wrote by myself, were about my girlfriend at the time. I won't mention her name either, but I was like totally gobsmacked. And then, it's one of those, you broke up with me, so I'm going to write a song about you songs. Those two. The other were co-composed with Bruce Handelman, but none of them had anything to do with the film. Other than that, they were just available and filled out. There's only 30 minutes of music on the entire album. which is
Right.
a little skimpy. But so we needed some tunes, and they just happened to just get on the record. It had nothing to do with the film.
Okay, and that brings me to my next question. Barry Kerr recalled in an interview that the album was recorded after the film. So what we're listening to were those re-recordings or the
No,
actual
that's
first
he's
recording
saying
of the
no. I'm
film?
sorry, but let me rush in and say that's 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 uh, the pharmacist. I think the pharmacist in him is coming out there. It's hard to imagine a reason that you would do a score for a movie and then record it again unless there was a legal problem about it.
Right.
No,
No.
certainly the sequences where I composed instrumental underscore, such as the main title, which had animation in it. We had to view. You can't write music for a movie and not see what the scenes are.
Yeah.
Right.
Even as Len says, um, uh, there was one cut where they saw the scene and they wrote the song. So and we recorded it. So
Right.
he may be thinking. I don't know what he's thinking. There's got to
Yeah.
be.
It definitely seemed
There's
odd to me, so I'm glad you could confirm that.
I no, I'm not trying to be mean here or anything like that. I'm just saying I don't understand how that would be. And certainly I was aware that we were doing this and I had seen the movie when I'd seen not the finished movie. You never the composer is the last person on a project. It's a
Right.
terrible position to be in. Any film composer, and I've done some legitimate Hollywood films since then, and I did a TV series for AMC where I wrote all the underscore. You are always the last person on the project because you can't write the music until they commit to exactly how the film is cut. Now, admittedly, in something like this movie, we could have recorded a 4-minute song. They could have said, okay, well, we'll slug it into the movie here and we'll fade out fast. So that's not always so precise. But what happens to a composer, film composers, have sympathy for them because people take futz around for 3 years getting the script right. They have 5,000 rewrites. They do 8 months of pre-production. They go and shoot. They run overtime. And then they go to the composer after they've taken 4.5 years to make the movie and say, you got 2 weeks to write the underscore. And it's got to supply everything emotionally that our film does not supply at this moment. And it's all up to you. And you have 2 weeks to do it. Where is it? Where is it? Why isn't it done already? So yeah. What was the question that I'm answering?
Joe?
I think you've answered it already.
This was simply,
About
I guess,
it could not be re-recorded.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there'd be no reason. What he may be remembering is that the song Lickety Split was released. Somehow what happened was the album was done, but either Barry or Michael or Barry and Michael had found another label that was interested in the single as a bubblegum single.
Right.
Right.
And so that came out, that was released after the soundtrack album had been released. It's funny in that usually if people acquire an
Right.
album, the single from the album or from the film will also be on the same label. In this case, they were not. I do think the label though was that not Green Bottle Records, and was that not a label that was sort of funded by Barry Kerr?
No. Green Bottle was a subsidiary of Gulf and Western. The single was released under a fictitious name,
Oh yeah,
Fist, and with no composer credit either. I believe.
I'm not listed. Oh, I was probably embarrassed.
Check it out it's on YouTube if you want to look it up.
Okay.
I
All
think the
right.
song was credited on the single to Fist as the
right.
composer.
Oh, that's what it
Yeah.
is. It's my vocal. And
Yes, it is.
Right.
You guys didn't sing on that cut, did
We
you?
did. I sang harmony. I think maybe it was Bruce and me, or Billy and I sang on the chorus at the end.
Okay, that when we finally get to the chorus.
Yes.
Yeah, got you. And we put down Fist. I don't know why, except it wasn't really a POOH-PAH property. I mean, what I mean is, it wasn't a song you guys wrote or created, so why would you put it out under your name?
Yeah.
That may have been why we released it as a single. No, well, as I say, well, none of us have seen the film in all that time. Was there not? I wasn't part of it, and I can't think why I wasn't part of it. I don't think it was any disharmony between any of us. But wasn't there some big concert dedicated to the movie at the Beacon
Oh, I'm
Theater?
so glad you brought it up.
Yes, that was one of my next questions. So
Yes, there
there you go.
was. Now, my one record, it was in August of 73. Now, I'd already left the band in 72 to go back to college. That's when the record dropped, and Barry Kerr and Michael Wright both contacted me, say they put a band together without me. Bruce and Seth were in it, but they got booked on the strength of the album. I didn't hear about this. I'm up at Oneonta State, studying to be a teacher. And they look, you got to come back to New York. The album dropped. They sent the band out on a tour of dates. They only lasted 2 gigs because they were not doing anything from the album because I wasn't there. The guy who was singing it didn't even bother to sing any of the songs on the record. So the tour went nowhere. They convinced me to come back. By the summer, after I'd been on tour with Michael Wright in all kinds of clubs, they put together the live show, The Flasher, on Broadway. And if you, Joe, would forward that information to Rupert, it would be really good. The article is very good, and it blew my mind. But Rupert, you wrote the lyrics to a song called "God Save the King," which was about Nixon getting leaving office. And it was to the tune of God Save the Queen, of course, only the lyrics had something to do with Sam Ervin and, how perverted Nixon was at the time. I sang it as a finale of the show. Boy, I wish I had a copy of that. But you don't recall that at all?
That's you. I mean, I'm absolutely sure you're right. And it sounds exactly like something I would have done if anyone had even sneezed a request of it, my reflex was always say, yeah, I'll do that. But both of these things are revelations to me now. That's amazing. I thought I had a great memory, but I do what I do. Am I correct? I talked about it's like we were in a toy store alone for the weekend. Am I correct in remembering that I accidentally locked us out of the studio on a Friday night, and we couldn't get back in this? We were in the control room, and I had, without meaning to, turned a button on the door to the studio, and we couldn't get in, and the janitor had gone home, so we had to. That doesn't ring a bell with you?
No, it does not.
I think my potential humiliation. It was lucky we had finished the last cut of the day, but the instrument stayed on the whole weekend, if I remember correctly.
That's quite possible. I can neither confirm or deny that.
Why do you have any do you have any memory of why we didn't record it at Scepter, where Michael was at home?
I don't know where the money came from and why that particular place was chosen. I think it had to do with the availability, perhaps, because I think we recorded in off hours or evening hours, maybe. Because I recall vividly arriving at the studio and it was dark. And of course, the freak show next door always made me stop on the steps and just take a look and go, okay, I'm going in now. But I kind of think we recorded at night, although Bruce tells me they were daytime sessions. So
I remember evening too.
Yeah, okay.
Because whenever those sessions would get done, I was impoverished. It always meant taking the A train back to 178th Street at like 1 a.m. And I thought it was a good idea back then. I thought it looked very cool. I sort of fancy. I loved Sherlock Holmes, so I had a tendency to wear capes a lot. And I thought instead of having, and I thought an attaché case was too corporate, so I carried everything that I needed in an old doctor's bag.
I remember.
And now looking back on it, that I was taking the A train from 57th Street to 178th for the George Washington bus terminal with it, carrying a doctor's bag that contains, what would you think a doctor's bag would contain?
Drugs.
How I ever made it home, I have no idea. And I remember them being nighttime sessions. But
okay, good. Because I was a full-time student at the time. And Joe, you have no idea what Manhattan was like in 1971 or 72. It was Sodom and Gomorrah and somebody else. It was really, really, it was the age of freakdom.
Yes, it really was. The stranger you were, the more you belonged. Groove Sound was actually the studio we were recorded at was, I think, sort of owned by Musicor Records. Musicor was a mid-budget label that relied largely on having Gene Pitney as a recording artist. And I recorded a record called Jennifer Tompkins, which was the first record of mine where I was a vocalist, not as myself, that went top 40. It went to like 30 something on the charts. And they had an in-house studio called Groove Sound, operated by Steve and Bill Jerome, who had been the producers of some very nice records like Walk Away Renee, and Little Ballerina. Was that the Little Ballerina, Tiny Ballerina, Little
Tiny Ballerina, I think.
Tiny Ballerina.
Talking about the Left Bank, right?
Yep. And Left Bank, right, with an E at the end of bank, I think. Maybe.
Yes, I think so.
The Left Bank with an E at the end, yes.
It was definitely a step up from Scepter. Scepter was a 4-track studio, and there was a hum in one of the 4 channels. When you recorded there, you had to kind of accept that your record would have some hum on it because they had never grounded one of the channels properly. Bacharach and David, with the death of Burt Bacharach in the last few days, they recorded a lot of Dionne Warwick there, but most of the big hits that she had were not recorded at Scepter because it wasn't really up to snuff. They were recorded at Bell Recording Studios.
Well, I recall Michael Wright talking about Dionne Warwick in a lot of situations. He was on a lot of those records, was he not?
Oh, yeah.
Talking about how she could smoke a pack of cigarettes and sing like a bird.
Sing like an angel. The funniest thing was that Scepter Records, to create an echo chamber, in those days, to have an echo chamber, pre-digital, anything, you actually needed a chamber. You needed somewhere to have a speaker that would have what sounds you were sending to the echo chamber with a microphone in it that would then come back to you on a delay, and that would give you this wonderful Grand Canyon or St. Paul's Cathedral echo. And at Scepter Records, the ladies' room was the echo chamber because there were so few women using it. And one time in the middle of a live session, someone went in there and flushed, and the record was completely destroyed. It sounded like Niagara Falls, all the water. But probably because there was a budget of sorts for this record. It wasn't a Michael Wright and Rupert Holmes special where we were making records basically for nothing.
Yeah.
Because there was a budget, we probably could afford to step up just barely up the ladder to an 8-track studio. Oh my God, an 8-track studio.
Yeah, wow.
And I'm sure Michael Wright would have been the engineer on it as well as the producer. I can't imagine he would have had anyone else engineer it.
Yeah. 2-inch tape, right?
Yeah. Little did, we always thought if we could just get the next, when you worked 8-track, you thought if I could just get 16.
Right.
And then if you got 16, you thought if I could just be in a 24-track studio. And now you can have as many tracks as you want. You just pop up 130 tracks digitally, and it's all there. It's an amazing time, though. And we were lucky to be in the business at that time.
Absolutely.
It was still a small business full of all kinds of characters, and you could operate a record label out of the trunk of your car. And I was privileged to just get into the business before it went big time corporate. And by the time I was recording my own albums, I was an artist on CBS Records. Actually, I was an artist on Epic, which was a division of CBS.
Yeah.
So it was Epic and Columbia. And by that time, it had become a very sensible business. And the only people who were the crazies were the artists, the producers, and sometimes the promotion people. Yeah. But the executives were all pretty buttoned down.
Yeah, I need to ask Rupert another question, and has nothing or very little to do with this record. But correct me if I'm wrong, Rupert, that shortly after I joined the band Ralph in Pennsylvania, you came to our rehearsal hall, which was on top of a mountain near Scranton. And you had this project, which I believe became Widescreen eventually, that you wanted the band to sort of be your backup band, and you wanted me to be singing some of these songs on that record, and we summarily turned you down. Do you remember that at all?
It's a good career move. Just a really good.
Yeah, it worked out great.
Good move.
Worked out great.
what's interesting is that it turned out, luckily, to be academic for both of us, because what happened shortly thereafter was that, as I said, Barbra Streisand heard that first album that I was planning to tour with, support the album with a live performance. She called me, summoned me to Hollywood, and I spent the next year and a half of my life working on an album called Lazy Afternoon, which I arranged and conducted all of, wrote about half of, including one song I wrote with her. Then the movie A Star Is Born. And when I finally got my bearings and got back to New York again and recorded a second album, I decided it would be a good idea not to find a band to play the songs that I had recorded on the first album with studio musicians, but instead record the album with the band that I would tour with.
Yeah.
And that was a group called Foxtrot. The lead guitarist in that band was Dean Balin.
Ah.
And Dean Balin has worked with me for the rest of my career. He's the guitar. Dean Balin, who was in that group Foxtrot. Actually, we called them, no, what was their name? Their name was, we called them Foxtrot for the album. Their real name was the Laughing Dogs, and they had a bit of a following in the punk world.
Ah.
And Dean is actually, that was my second album. By my fifth album, Dean is actually the guitarist that you hear playing da 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 da. So he's been heard by people for over 40 years now. So
yeah, I'm still kicking myself.
But Ralph was a good band. You were
they should have been bigger, but I had bought into the collective thinking that we were going to be the next Beatles. But I'm telling you and the world this for the first time. I was really very flattered. Thank you. And boy, what a dumb move that was on our part.
Oh, it's, seriously, life's full of all kinds of, really. And you never know what, if you made a move in that direction, maybe it benefited you another way.
Right.
The thing I most regret is the first time I met Paul McCartney. He said to me, "I'm a big fan of your work." And I said, "Yeah, right." And then I thought, I've just met Paul McCartney, and somehow I chose my first words to him to be, "Yeah, right." Luckily, Linda McCartney was there with him, and she said, "No, we really listen to your albums. We like your work. We love it." So I compensated. I've always regretted that moment, for example, in that choice.
Well, I've made an ass of myself in front of my heroes also. So I think it's a common thing that the worst thing you could possibly think of is going to come out of your mouth. Oh, Paul McCartney, I used to play you on Broadway. I'm sure he'd love that. Yeah.
Did you, when you were studying, when you went to college and studied to be a teacher, did you end up being a teacher? And what subject did you teach?
No, the whole POOH-PAH thing sort of derailed my education because they were flying me back and forth from college, from Oneonta to New York on these little 2-seat planes to play at showcases for the band and gigs. So I'd end up staying up all night, getting on a plane at LaGuardia Airport, flying back to Oneonta just to make it in time for my psychology lecture, and promptly falling asleep in class, and subsequently flunked out of my third year of college. So no, never got my degree in education.
I had dropped clarinet as a major in college and changed it to theory and composition, mainly theory. And I had achieved Dean's List, and some of my teachers would be playing on my recording sessions, and it was kind of weird.
Yeah, I can imagine.
They'd come up to me at the end of the session and say, "Sure, hope you'll think of me again sometime." And appreciate that. Or they'd say, "Really, this was very nice." I'd say, "You gave me a C on this 2 days ago. So, and then suddenly I got an offer to go to LA and become the A&R person, artist and repertoire. That meant sort of the overseer of artists and what they record and who they record it with, for a label as a label that was not as legitimate as I thought it was. And suddenly Vince Edwards, Dr. Penn Casey on TV.
Yeah.
Vince Edwards was a big TV star for playing the surgeon.
Ben Casey,
brain surgeon Ben Casey.
Yeah.
And I did a whole album with him, some of which was recorded at the aforementioned Bell Sound and some in L.A. And suddenly he's on the Carol Burnett show and singing my song on the Tonight Show and Flip Wilson, things like that. And suddenly it was time to go back to school. And I thought, but I'm going to go back to school to learn how to do what I'm being employed to do now. Surely I should stay here. So I was a college dropout as well, and never got a degree until 2 years ago when Manhattan School of Music gave me the immense honor of giving me a honorary doctorate. And
that's very nice.
Well, I think it was coupled with the fact that their class was performing. They have a great theater school, and they were doing my musical, The Mystery of Edwin Drood. So yeah. I think it all tied together.
I think you did okay, Rupert. I do. My dilemma was that I was listening to my parents. They were of that generation that your college education is paramount. They just hated the idea that I was a musician, and they fought me tooth and nail. So I acquiesced to their wishes by continuing to be in college. But, I knew what my path would be. But like you said, we were choir boys. So I was listening to my parents, but the Siren Song was way too strong for me. So I'm glad I chose the path I did.
Did the band ever reunite at any point?
No. The night after that show at the Beacon Theater in August, I believe it was August the 18th, if my memory is correct, the band broke up.
August 21st, yes.
Well,
August
okay.
the 21st, yep.
I'll miss those 3 days. That's it. No, it was never another gig. It was never another project. I was broke, living in the apartment that Barry Kerr allowed me to live in for $100 a month rent on 72nd Street. And like a month later, I joined the band Ralph because of Michael Wright, again, recommending me for the job. So I didn't have many options, so I did. And that changed my life in a lot of ways. Like you said, there's no rhyme or reason to why these things happen. They just do, and it's best to not have any regrets about any of that stuff.
I agree.
So did you ever playing any of these songs live?
Me? Never. No, the one song on the album that was actually a holdover from the band before they were POOH-PAH, we came up with the brilliant name of Cement Raft. And so the one song, Laughter and Pain, no, two songs, Laughter and Pain and Two-Way Road, were written by Bruce and Seth Handelman, I believe, in 1970. So those are two songs that we played as part of our live act, but we didn't know at the time that they would be included in the film or in the soundtrack. And they're probably not in the film at all. They're just on the record.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Cement Raft.
Yeah.
There's a success-oriented. That's it. Can your ship? What's the line in Operation Petticoat? Can this submarine submerge, officer? Like a rock, sir.
Can it resurface? Well,
no, that's a completely different thing. That's quite an inventive title.
And Rupert, chronologically speaking, so you score The Flasher, then Wet Rainbow. Where does that fall chronologically, leading to your work with Barbara and, of course, Widescreen?
Well, I did Wet Rainbow last year, and I'm hoping something will come of that. No, I'm kidding. So here's the deal. This is a fascinating story, I think. Well, to me it is, of course. But hanging with me, it's kind of funny. So as I said, I did all these strange things for a living. I did the, Charlie Pride song folio, Did You Think to Pray? I did the piano voice arrangements for that. I did anytime a high school band, a high school concert band plays selections from Hair, That's my chart, done under my father's name, Len Goldstein. Just anything, anything. And I did 3 porno films. One made by Gerard Damiano, who was on a hot streak with, because he had done Deep Throat and The Devil and Miss Jones, and this was the next film. This was going to be the legit porno film, Memories Within Saggy. And then I did this movie called Wet Rainbow with the usual suspects. I think Harry Reams was in all the films. I think he was in The Flasher. I mean, the movie that Harry Reams was ubiquitous that way. He showed up in everything. And for this one, they decided they wanted a real artful score. So I used like string quartet using members of the New York Philharmonic as a string quartet, and harp. Harp always sounds pretty expensive. It's one player, but it always sounds like you somehow went for a lot of money. Yeah. Classy. And I wrote a number of sensitive songs about the inner feelings of the female characters in the movie, and wrote the lyrics virtually overnight and sang them myself. And since I didn't have a record deal, I thought, well, maybe someone will appreciate it. So I put my own name on the movie. I didn't use, like most people use, funny names and stuff.
Yeah.
I was music composed, songs arranged and performed by Rupert Holmes. And the movie came out and was considered quite tasteful for a porno film.
Well, that's the whole story behind The Flasher, is that Barry wanted it to be a comedy. Maybe today it would have been, his original version would have been rated R. But if you read this article that Joe turned me on to about the film, that it was considered not porno enough. So they had to go back and reshoot scenes with Harry Reams, whose mustache at that time was much bushier. So he had to do this. It was kind of like Lugosi in Plan 9 from Outer Space.
Yeah, exactly.
Plan 9 from Outer Space. I like that. Yeah. The thing that I'll get back to the line where I was going with that in a second, but the thing that people lost track of when they did the more artful, one of the reasons they were willing to hire me, an inexperienced film composer for these movies, not The Flasher, that's its own thing because I had the connection with Michael, but some of these other films, was because no one cared what the music was like in a porn film.
Right.
The market was for men in trench coats to go into the movie theater. And no one ever left a porn film in those days saying, no, I thought the leitmotif of the second theme was inadequate and the French horn was completely uncalled for. So they would let you do it because you'd be willing to work for pennies, literally pennies. So anyway, this last film, I wrote songs and sang them myself and took a screen credit. Shortly thereafter, I had the chance to make my first record album. And as I told you, Barbra Streisand discovered it. And it had been a critical success. A lot of great reviews. It was picked as one of the top 10 albums of the year by Stephen Gaines in the Daily News. But commercially, it didn't click. And when I was working with Barbra Streisand, one day I got comfortable enough with her to say, Barbara, it's wonderful how you discovered the album, my album, and the risk you took by saying, I want this fellow to write and arrange and conduct my next album. I said, but that album was not like a hit. It's not like you got on any bandwagon. How did you learn about this album? And she said, well, my previous album was arranged by Jack Nietzsche, who, if I'm saying the name right, am I saying it right, Joe?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Jack Nietzsche, who was known for both playing piano on a lot of the early Rolling Stones records, and I think he wrote Needles and Pins with Sonny Bono. I think it's Sonny Bono and Jack Nietzsche, the author of that amazing record. And also, he had won the Oscar for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He had written the underscore for that movie. And I said, well, and she said, Jack Nietzsche was arranging my previous album called Butterfly. And I said to him, are there any new songwriters on the market out there that I should be paying attention to, that I should be listening to? And he said, well, yeah, there's this guy, Rupert Holmes. You should listen to this album. It's really interesting. I said, well, that's fascinating. I said, but Barbara, how did Jack Nietzsche get my album? And she said, well, apparently Jack Nietzsche really likes porno films. He had seen Wet Rainbow. liked the songs, took note of my name up there on screen. And then when the album came out, my first album, he said, "Oh, that's that guy who writes porno music. I have to check this out." So my writing for porn films led to one of the turning points of my career, which was working with Barbra Streisand and having her become the evangelist for my work. So you never know where things can lead. And it's all
That's
just
so funny. I would have never, in all these intervening years, would I have thought that you were A, involved in that sort of thing before we met, B, proud of the work you had done in that milieu. So mind blown, you know.
I think the Flasher was my first.
Okay.
I think the Flasher was my first.
Okay.
And there are things, expressions for the first time that I could use here, but I don't think we'll use it in this context.
Yeah. Understood.
I think it was Flasher first, thinking that would be a one-time foray. But again, by the way, the point that you made is so true, which is, Barry wanted to make it a comedy porn film. People going to porn films just want, we want our laughs. We'll go see Abbott and Costello on TV for free. It's like, we'll see Monty Python. We'll see, so the effort to, and the idea that it's not porn enough. It's a comedy film. I paid good money to see this porn film, and there's nothing but comedy in it.
Yeah.
You're a disgrace to the industry. So yeah, that's funny that they had to shoot additional hardcore footage. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Why would
and Lenny, you mentioned that one of the band members did a voice for the animated sequences.
Yes, the aforementioned Billy Arrington, who, by the way, there's a very brief section of Camera, the song, where Billy Arrington is the voice of Spencer the Sperm, the animated character from the movie, and he sings in it. It's like a very heavily flanged effect on his voice, and it's the only line that isn't me singing a lead. So check that out. But what was the original question? Yeah, Billy Arrington was the voice of Spencer the Sperm in the film and in that brief section of Camera. So I'd love to see the original film. I don't have a copy of it. I could be more specific about it. But that was the only time that anybody else's voice is clearly heard on that record except mine. That wasn't your question, was it?
No, but again, you answered it. And if we only had the film, I'm sure there'd be many more questions.
Yeah.
But I have to ask you, gentlemen, were you surprised once this album started to become a cult favorite, really? I know Beck did a photo shoot for Vanity Fair where he was holding up the cover of this album and pointed out how much he loved it and how much he loved Sour Soul. As Rupert mentioned, Sour Soul's been sampled so many times. Did that ever surprise you, or how do you reflect on its legacy now?
It did surprise me. I'll go first. It surprised the hell out of me. And I couldn't understand. For some reason, I was never very proud of it. Maybe it was my Catholic upbringing, like Rupert mentioned, beating us. We were like choir boys. So maybe I had just pushed it into the background. I never mentioned it whenever I would audition for anything or any of the work I'd done, recording wise or acting or voice acting, whatever I was doing. I never, ever mentioned it as a credit because I was frankly embarrassed about it. Then when I looked it up on Discogs one day, and I saw that copies of the record were going for upwards of $250 to $300, I thought, what's going on here? So, but apparently, to Rupert's credit, it was that Sour Soul song that had been lifted and used in so many different permutations, especially some syndicated radio show, as I understand it. So it became this underground cult thing because there were only so few copies made, because once Gulf and Western got wind of that it was a soundtrack to a porno, they stopped production. So there were a limited number of copies. So my copy, and I'm thinking like, here's a way to excise my guilt. I'll sell it. This way, I don't have any connection to it anymore. So stupidly, I sold it about 3 years ago. I just got rid of a lot of vinyl albums I had laying around. Someone will buy this. Maybe I'll just, inscribe it. dear so and so, nice that you like this. So I don't. That's why I asked you last night if you had a copy of the record. I haven't listened to it, and I haven't had it in my possession for so long. I thought, well, if somebody wants this for $250, I'm willing to sell it to them. So that's, yeah, it blew my mind. In short, yeah.
I was not surprised. First of all, unlike you, Lenny, when I first started, when I was um, trying to get my first album noticed, not this album, but my first album was Rupert Holmes on Epic Records. I mentioned it all the time because I thought it was quirky and interesting. It was something to talk about. When I did the Merv Griffin show, one of his first questions to me was, "So we hear you did the music for porno films," and that's when I said to him. That's when I said to him, I scored porno films. I did not score in porno films. And so I was never ashamed of it because I thought we were all doing really good work for kids. We were kids.
Wow.
And then when I heard some cuts on the internet, on YouTube, I thought, damned if this was an absolutely relevant album, instrumentally, vocally, Lenny, wonderful, sensitive vocals.
Amazing. Well, gentlemen, I can't thank you enough for taking this time this afternoon. This was absolutely incredible, and I can't thank you enough for entrusting me to bring this incredible album back into the world. And that means the world to me, and having your support means the world to me.